Krathzek's combat visor flashed red with the words, "Apex Predator Breach. Lethal. Response authorized." But when he crashed through the enclosure door, plasma rifle raised, the human keeper was lying flat on her back with 3 Krevnath cubs sleeping on her chest, and she just lifted one finger to her lips and shushed him. He froze mid-stride, every combat instinct screaming contradictions. The cubs, each one the size of a fully grown Terran wolf, each one documented as having killed their last 5 handlers within minutes of contact, were curled against the human's body like domesticated pets. Their crystalline claws, capable of shearing through military-grade armor plating, rested extended against her thin uniform. Their triple rows of teeth, designed to crack bone and tear through subdermal shielding, were visible in their relaxed jaws as they breathed in synchronized rhythm with her chest rising and falling. "Elena," he whispered, his translator barely processing the word through his constricted throat. "Do not move. Extraction team is—" "Shh," she whispered back, not even turning her head toward him. She had a datapad propped on her stomach, reading something while occasionally reaching up to scratch behind one cub's ear. "You'll wake them. They just got settled." Krathzek's secondary heart kicked in, flooding his system with combat hormones. This was impossible. This violated every principle of xenobiology he'd learned in 4 decades of service. The Krevnath were apex predators from a death world that made the old Earth look like a vacation colony. Their young were more dangerous than the adults, driven by instinct to kill anything larger than themselves to establish dominance hierarchy. The Galactic Council had authorized their presence in this research station only under the strictest containment protocols: full armor, neural suppression fields, minimum 3-guard rotation with lethal force pre-authorized. And this human, this unarmored, unaugmented, unbelievably fragile human, was using them as pillows. "Medical Officer Vesra," Krathzek sub-vocalized into his comm, never taking his eyes off the scene. "I need immediate biological assessment. The human is in direct physical contact with all 3 specimens." "Impossible." Vesra's voice came back sharp with disbelief. "The neural signature alone should have triggered their prey drive. Krathzek, you need to— Wait. I'm seeing the feed now." A pause. "By the void. How is she still alive?" "Unknown. Advising you observe Protocol 77 Alpha." "Confirmed. Scanning now." One of the cubs shifted, and Krathzek's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. The creature's head rose slightly, its 6 eyes, each one tracking movement in different spectrums simultaneously, opened and fixed on him. He'd seen that look before, right before a Krevnath juvenile tore through a containment team on Station Praxis. The guard commander there had been found in pieces, but the cub just yawned. A gesture that revealed a mouth that could easily engulf a human head whole, and settled back down against Elena's shoulder, making a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl. "Seriously, you're going to wake the babies," Elena said, her voice carrying that particular tone of mild annoyance that Krathzek had learned meant humans were about to say something that would make no sense whatsoever. "They were fussy all morning. Took me an hour to get them calm enough to sleep." "Fussy," Krathzek repeated, his translator struggling with the context. "The Krevnath cubs were fussy. Yeah, you know, restless, overstimulated, needed some quiet time and a nap." Elena finally glanced at him, her eyes reflecting that bizarre mammalian expressiveness that still unsettled him after 6 months of working with human consultants. "Could you grab my water bottle? It's on the observation desk. I'm getting thirsty, but I don't want to disturb them by reaching." "You want me to retrieve your water?" His voice came out flat, mechanical. His brain was having difficulty processing requests for beverage service while 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous juvenile predators were using a human as furniture. "If you don't mind, thanks." Vesra's voice crackled in his comm. "Krathzek, I'm reading her vitals. Stress hormones are barely elevated. Heart rate is 72 beats per minute. She's relaxed. That's medically impossible given the circumstances. I'm aware, but that's what the scans show. More concerning, the cub's stress markers are at 0. 0 Krathzek. When was the last time we recorded a Krevnath juvenile with 0 stress markers in captivity? Never. Krathzek slowly lowered his rifle, though his grip remained white-knuckle tight. We've never recorded that. Minimum baseline is always 47%, even in optimal conditions with sedation. She's doing something. I don't know what, but she's doing something that's completely outside our understanding of predator psychology. The enclosure door hissed open again, and Security Chief Tholmik entered with 3 more guards, all armed with heavy containment weapons. They spread out in standard predator containment formation, creating overlapping fields of fire that could lock down the entire space in microseconds. Elena's eyes tracked them with obvious disapproval. Really? More guns? Do you guys have to do this every time? Human Elena. Tholmik's voice carried the growl of someone who'd spent too many years expecting the worst and being proven right. You are in violation of Containment Protocols 7, 14, and 23. You entered an apex predator enclosure without armor, without backup, and without authorization. I had authorization from Dr. Velomora. She said the cubs needed behavioral assessment. Elena's hand moved to scratch behind another cub's ear, and every guard in the room tensed. The cub leaned into her touch, making that purring growl sound again. And I can't exactly assess their behavior while wearing armor that scares them half to death. Scares them? Tholmik's crest flared in agitation. They're apex predators. They don't experience fear. Right. That's why the last handler team had to sedate them just to enter the enclosure, because they weren't scared at all. Elena's sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a blade. Look, I've worked with predators on Earth for 15 years. Big cats, bears, wolves, even a few rescue crocs. You know what they all have in common? They're way more dangerous when they're terrified than when they're comfortable. This human, Vesra said over the comm, her voice tight with concern, is comparing Krevnath death cubs to Terran wildlife. I'm aware, Krathzek responded, watching Elena with the same intensity he'd used to track an enemy combatant. I'm beginning to suspect that's the problem. What's the problem? Tholmik demanded. We've been treating them like the threat they are. She's been treating them like... Krathzek struggled to find the word in his own language, finally settling on the human term. Like babies. They are babies, Elena interjected, clearly having overheard through her own comm piece. They're what, 4 months old? 5? Yeah, they're dangerous babies, but they're still babies. They need structure, comfort, and someone who isn't pointing guns at them every 5 seconds. The cub on her left shoulder stirred again, this time raising its head fully. Krathzek's tactical display immediately painted it as primary threat, calculating strike vectors and probability matrices. The creature's eyes fixed on him again, and this time he could see the predatory intelligence there. The kind of awareness that had put the Krevnath at the top of their world's food chain for 3 million years. Then it made a chirping sound and nuzzled Elena's neck. Good boy, Striker, Elena cooed, using the name she'd apparently given the cub without consulting anyone. It's okay. The scary armored people are just worried. They don't understand you yet. The scary armored people, Tholmik said slowly, are the only reason these creatures haven't escaped and killed half the station's population. The scary armored people are the reason these creatures are stressed enough to be aggressive in the first place. Elena shifted slightly, and somehow managed to sit up without disturbing the cubs, who adjusted their positions to remain in contact with her. One draped across her shoulders like a living scarf, another curled in her lap, the third pressed against her side. When I got here this morning, they were pacing, showing their teeth, scratching the walls. Classic anxiety behaviors. Those are pre-hunting behaviors, Krathzek corrected automatically. In adult Krevnath, sure. In cubs, that's fear response. They're in a new environment, surrounded by potential threats, no parent figure to provide security. She looked directly at him, and Krathzek was struck by how utterly calm her expression was. So I came in, sat down on the floor, and waited. Let them approach me. Let them investigate on their terms. Didn't make eye contact, didn't make sudden movements, just existed nearby until they decided I wasn't a threat. And then, Vesra asked over the comm, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her medical concerns. And then they came over to check me out, sniffed me, tested me with little paw touches, the usual stuff. When they realized I wasn't going to hurt them or compete with them, they relaxed. One of them climbed into my lap. Then the others wanted in. Next thing I know, they're all cuddled up and falling asleep because apparently someone, she looked pointedly at Tholmik, didn't bother to adjust their sleep cycle routine when you moved them to this enclosure 3 days ago. So they've been overtired and cranky. Tholmik's crest flattened in what Krathzek recognized as embarrassment. The sleep cycle should have been managed by the automated systems. Well, your automated systems didn't account for the fact that this enclosure has different ambient light wavelengths than their last one, so their circadian rhythm got disrupted. Elena scratched under Stryker's chin, and the cub's eyes half closed in contentment. Basic behavioral science, guys. Come on. Krathzek found himself holstering his rifle, much to his own surprise. The tactical situation hadn't changed. 3 apex predators were still in direct contact with an unprotected human, but somehow, the threat assessment his combat-trained mind kept generating didn't match what his eyes were seeing. Human Elena, he said carefully. The last team to attempt behavioral assessment of these specimens consisted of 5 trained xenobiologists, all wearing full armor, all equipped with neural dampeners. The cubs attacked within 2 minutes. Dr. Shalkor lost 3 limbs before we could extract him. I know. Yeah, I read the report. Elena's expression softened slightly. That's because you all came in like an invasion force, stomping around, bright lights, energy weapons humming. You triggered every defensive instinct they had. They weren't being aggressive. They were being terrified. Krevnath cubs don't experience terror, Tholmik insisted, but his voice carried less certainty than before. Everything experiences terror when it's threatened. That's not predator psychology. That's just psychology. Elena looked down at the cubs surrounding her. These guys aren't monsters. They're scared kids in a confusing situation, acting on instinct because nobody's bothered to show them they're safe. Krathzek accessed the security footage from Elena's entry into the enclosure, watching the timestamp roll backward until he found the moment she'd entered. No armor, no weapons, just a human in a standard station jumpsuit, carrying what appeared to be a small bag. She'd entered slowly, kept her head down, and immediately sat against the far wall. The cubs had noticed her within seconds, their heads snapping toward the movement. They'd approached in hunting formation, pack tactics that should have ended with her death. Instead, Elena had remained perfectly still, letting them circle her, sniff her, even paw at her with those razor claws. When one got too rough, she'd made a soft sound, not aggressive, not scared, just acknowledging. And the cub had backed off slightly. She'd reached into her bag, pulled out what the analysis labeled as Terran protein-based sustenance, and broken off small pieces, tossing them a few feet away. The cubs had investigated the food, found it acceptable, and gradually associated her presence with positive outcomes. Within 20 minutes, they were comfortable enough to lie near her. Within 40 minutes, one had rested its head on her leg. By the hour mark, all 3 were in physical contact, their nervous systems clearly registering her as non-threatening. By the void, Krathzek muttered. She actually did it. She established pack hierarchy without dominance assertion. Without what? Tholmik moved to look at the footage over his shoulder. Watch. She never challenged them, never tried to assert authority, never showed fear. She just existed in their space until they accepted her presence as neutral. Then she provided food, which created positive association. Then she provided comfort through physical contact, which triggered their juvenile bonding instincts. Krathzek looked back at Elena, who was now humming something while the cubs dozed. She turned them from threat assessment to pack assessment. That's impossible without neural dampening, Vesra said, but she sounded less certain. The cubs' aggressive instincts should override any bonding behavior in the absence of their biological parent. Unless, Krathzek said slowly, they recognize her as a parent figure. Elena laughed, the sound bright and entirely too cheerful for someone surrounded by creatures that had killed multiple sentients. Parent figure might be a stretch, more like the nice adult who shows up with snacks and doesn't yell at them. I'm basically the cool aunt. The cool aunt, Thalmik repeated, his translator struggling with the colloquialism. To 3 Krevnath death cubs. Sure, why not? Elena's grin was pure human mischief. Now, seriously, can someone get my water? My mouth's getting dry, and if I move too much, I'm going to wake them up, and then you'll have 3 cranky cubs who didn't get their full nap. Trust me, you don't want that. Krathzek found himself walking to the observation desk, retrieving the water bottle, and bringing it to her. He extended it slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Elena took it with a grateful nod, managed to crack it open one-handed, and took a long drink. Thanks. You're Krathzek, right? The commander? I've seen you around, but we haven't officially met. She shifted the cub in her lap slightly so she could extend her hand. Elena, wildlife rehabilitation specialist, currently on loan from the Terran Conservation Corps because apparently nobody in this station knows how to handle animals without sedating them first. He stared at her hand for a moment. That bizarre human greeting ritual that involved touching potential threats, and then, more out of shock than conscious decision, gripped it briefly. Her hand was small, soft, completely lacking the armored hide or reinforced bone structure of any species he'd ever worked with. And she'd used those soft, vulnerable hands to calm 3 creatures that had torn through combat armor like tissue paper. This is going to require significant incident reporting, he said finally. Probably, but hey, at least nobody died this time. Elena took another sip of water, then carefully set the bottle aside. Now, if you guys could maybe clear out and let these babies finish their nap, that would be great. They need at least another hour of sleep, and having a bunch of nervous guards standing around isn't helping their rest cycle. You want us to leave you alone with them? I want you to do your jobs from the observation room like normal people, instead of standing here having a panic attack while 3 sleeping cubs take a nap. She raised an eyebrow. Unless you think they're suddenly going to wake up and decide I'm breakfast? Krathzek looked at his security chief, who looked at the medical officer's feed, who looked at the cubs peacefully sleeping against the human. Every protocol they had said this situation should be impossible. Every bit of training screamed that they needed to extract her immediately. But the footage didn't lie. The biological scans didn't lie. And somehow, impossibly, the human had done what 4 decades of xenobiological research said couldn't be done. We'll observe from the monitoring station, Krathzek decided. But if there's any sign of aggression, there won't be. They're babies having nap time, not soldiers planning an assault. Elena was already settling back down, the cubs adjusting with her. Besides, if something goes wrong, you'll have plenty of time to do your hero thing. These guys are way more interested in sleeping than eating right now. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. It's just reality. She yawned. Honestly, I might nap too. Got up early for this. And with that utterly insane statement, Elena closed her eyes, apparently fully intending to sleep alongside 3 apex predators, while armed guards watched in horror from outside the enclosure. Krathzek gestured for his team to withdraw, keeping his rifle ready but pointed at the floor. They filed out slowly, sealing the enclosure door behind them. Through the observation glass, he could see Elena's chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, the cubs matching her breathing, all 4 beings apparently at complete peace. Someone get me the director, Krathzek said, quietly, and the xenobiology department head. And probably the council liaison. Why? Thalmik asked. Because in 30 years of service, I've never seen anything like this. He watched Elena's hand move unconsciously to rest on Stryker's head, the lethal predator leaning into the touch. And if this is what humans can do without even trying, we need to completely rethink everything we know about apex predator management. Vesra's voice came over the comm, quiet and wondering. She just invalidated 4 centuries of Krevnath behavioral science in under 2 hours. I know. Using snacks and nap time. I know. The council is going to lose their minds. Krathzek kept watching the impossible scene, his tactical mind already spinning through the implications. They're not the only ones. 20 minutes later, Krathzek stood in the observation room surrounded by half the station's command staff, all of them staring through the reinforced glass at the same impossible scene. "This is a prank," Station Director Vexral announced flatly, his scales rippling with agitation. "Some kind of elaborate human humor that I'm not understanding. Sir, the cubs are real." Vesra pulled up her medical scans on the central display. "I've confirmed genetic markers. These are genuine Krevnath juveniles, approximately 4.3 months old. Bite force rated at 6,000 newtons. Claw penetration capability through Class 5 armor. Neural chemistry consistent with apex predator aggression profiles. And the human? Completely unmodified. No subdermal armor, no pheromone suppressors, no neural dampening field. She's baseline Terran with slightly elevated vitamin D levels and what appears to be caffeine in her system." Vexral's crest flattened. "So you're telling me an unmodified human, caffeinated, is currently being used as a bed by 3 creatures that killed our best handlers?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir." Through the glass, Elena shifted slightly in her sleep. The cubs immediately adjusted, maintaining contact with her body. One of them, Stryker, according to Elena's unauthorized naming system, draped a paw across her chest, claws extended just enough to rest against her collarbone without breaking skin. "Those claws could pierce her heart in a microsecond," Thalmik observed, his voice tight. "They could," Krathzek agreed. "They're not." "Why aren't they?" "Because she doesn't believe they will." Vexral turned to stare at him. "Belief doesn't alter predator behavior, Commander." "Doesn't it?" "Look at the recordings." Krathzek pulled up the footage of previous handler interactions. "Every team we sent in expected violence. They prepared for violence. They moved like combatants entering hostile territory. And the cubs, reading those signals through millions of years of evolved threat assessment, responded accordingly." He switched to Elena's entry footage. She expected, well, not friendship exactly, but she expected the cubs to be cubs, scared, confused, needing comfort. She moved like someone approaching nervous animals, not enemy combatants. No threat display, no challenge. "And that shouldn't work," Vesra interjected. "Krevnath juveniles are documented to attack even non-threatening species. It's instinctive behavior to eliminate potential competition. Except she's not competition. She's not trying to dominate them or their territory. She's not even trying to control them. Watch here." He highlighted a moment where Elena had turned away from one cub who was getting too rough. She set a boundary without aggression. The cub respected it. Impossible. And yet. Krathzek gestured at the scene before them. Vexral was silent for a long moment, his secondary eyelids blinking in the pattern that indicated rapid processing. Finally, "How many humans does the Terran Conservation Corps have available?" "Sir, because if one human can do this," he waved at the enclosure, "then we need to reconsider every single dangerous species protocol in the station, starting with the Vextar serpents in Sector 7. The ones that paralyzed 3 guards last week just by looking at them. Those exact ones." Vexral pulled up a communication interface. "Get me the TCC liaison, and someone wake up the Council's Xenobiology Committee. They're going to want to see this." Through the glass, Elena yawned and stretched without waking. The cubs stretched with her, synchronizing their movements to hers like a bizarre multi-species dance. Krathzek watched his entire understanding of predator psychology crumble in real time, and found himself hoping the humans had more wildlife specialists available. They were going to need them. The cubs woke 40 minutes later, and that's when things got truly interesting. Stryker was the first to stir, raising his head and yawning wide enough to showcase every single one of his 72 teeth. The observation room went silent, every guard's hand moving to their weapon. Elena just scratched behind his ear ridges. "Good nap, buddy," the cub chirped. Actually chirped like some kind of Terran bird, and licked her face. "Okay, gross. Your breath is terrible." Elena laughed, gently pushing his snout away. "We need to talk about dental hygiene." "She's scolding it," Vesra whispered. "She's scolding an apex predator about hygiene." The second cub, Elena had named it Patches for the darker crystalline formations on its back, stretched and climbed over her shoulder, balancing on her head briefly before jumping down. The third, who she called Tiny despite being the largest, remained in her lap, making the purring growl sound. Elena sat up fully, and all three cubs maintained proximity, circling her like satellites around a planet. When she stood, they followed, looking up at her with what could only be described as expectation. "All right, who wants breakfast?" Elena asked brightly. 3 apex predators chirped in unison. "That's what I thought. Come on." She walked toward the feeding area, and they trotted after her like domesticated pets, their lethal claws clicking against the floor. Vexral's voice was hollow. "She's taking them for breakfast." "Like children," Krathzek confirmed. "This violates everything." "I know, sir. Everything we've ever documented about this species." "I know. Someone get me a xenobiologist. Now." Dr. Kolveth, the station's senior xenobiologist, arrived within the hour, his 8 eyes blinking in disbelief as he watched Elena hand-feed the cubs chunks of synthesized protein. "This is doctored footage," he said immediately. "Live feed," Vesra corrected. "Then the cubs are sedated. 0 sedatives in their systems. I've been monitoring continuously. Neural dampening field disabled when she entered. She specifically requested it." Kolveth's breathing spiracles flared. "Then how?" "Watch." Krathzek pulled up the full interaction timeline. They watched Elena establish boundaries when Patches got too rough during play. Watched her redirect Tiny's biting behavior onto appropriate toys. Watched her reward Striker's gentle behavior with affection and treats. "She's training them," Kolveth said slowly, using positive reinforcement methodology. "On creatures we classified as untrainable," Vexral added, "because we approached them as threats, not students." Elena's voice came through the comm. She'd apparently been listening. "You can't train something when your primary interaction is combat mode. They need to trust first, then learn." She tossed a ball, and all 3 cubs scrambled after it in a chaotic pile of claws and crystalline scales. "Someone," Vexral said quietly, "explain to me how we've been studying these creatures for decades and missed something this fundamental." Nobody had an answer. The cubs brought the ball back to Elena, tails wagging in species-specific contentment patterns never before recorded in captivity. She threw it again, laughing. 3 hours later, Elena submitted her report with recommendations. Remove armor during non-emergency interactions. Lower voice volumes. Stop treating every encounter as combat preparation. "Basic stuff," she told Vexral. "Respect their space, read their body language, be consistent." Krathzek volunteered for retraining immediately. Within a week, Striker approached him without hostility. Within 2, the cub accepted food from his hand. It was the hardest thing he'd ever learned, being gentle instead of dominant. Elena moved on to the Vextar serpents next, mentioning they probably just needed enrichment activities. Krathzek found her 3 days later with a 15-foot serpent wrapped around her shoulders, its paralyzing gaze completely inactive. "See?" she called cheerfully. "Sweethearts." He updated his report. Recommend immediate human consultation for all apex predator facilities. Some species conquered through strength. Humans conquered through kindness. Somehow, that was infinitely more terrifying.